Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Out in the holler where the secrets creep, garbage can dudes digging mighty deep. Secret societies, shadows in the pines. Operation GCD of American rebels design. Double J searching deep in his brain hole, past layers of melted hops and bone resin. From cults to cover-ups, we're talking about all of that. So watch your sixth friend and the truth we trust. The world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Join us on the journey and enjoy the show. Thanks for joining us to get a little GC. Hey, the world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo coats haunt the moon's pale beam. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Hell, the world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Out in the holler where the secrets creep, garbage can dudes digging mighty deep. Secret societies, shadows in the pines. Operation GCD of American rebels design. Double J searching deep in his brain hole, past layers of melted hops and bone resin. From cults to cover-ups, we're talking about all of that. So watch your sixth friend and the truth we trust. The world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Join us on the journey and enjoy the show. Thanks for joining us to get a little GC. Hey, the world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo coats haunt the moon's pale beam. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Hell, the world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze.
Howdy, folks. Your host, Double J, back here coming at you live from my studio / nice one. Good one there, Jim Bobby. My studio / RV dining room located directly inside America. Welcome back, folks, to the interwebs. Once again, JJ Vance here, host of Operation GCD. Oh, there it is. And more notably, not the vice president. Anyhow, folks of the interwebs, I will be your pilot and navigator for tonight's shenanigan-infused journey into the mind of this particular garbage can dude. So, thanks for joining me here, folks of the interwebs, tonight to get a little GCD. Not gonna lie to you, got a real barn burner here on deck for y'all tonight. Gonna go over the Society of the Cincinnati and a general kind of overview. It's a common topic of conversation here on Operation GCD, and one would say maybe the underlying thread amongst most of the conversations I have, especially of a parapolitical nature, right? So, on that topic, the Society of Cincinnati forms before the nation of America, and while it's obviously the folks who started America formed the society beforehand, May 13th. Friday, May 13th, 1783, a full almost 4 months prior to the Treaty of Paris, which formed America. So this, if you take the tour today at the Society of Cincinnati headquarters, so there was 13 original chapters, one for each colony, and a French chapter, because the French and American revolutions were the same thing. And in fact, after we're going to go over some of the general overview of the Society of the Cincinnati, their composition, their organization, etc. But we're also in their impact, right? But we're also going to be discussing the larger kind of, sometimes I like to reevaluate things I'm looking at, Society of the Cincinnati or otherwise, and wonder if I'm looking at it in too of a narrow focus, and perhaps need to have a wider scope. And that became pretty evident to me that was the case when I started looking into the French chapter of the Society of Cincinnati. So most of the society, so if you go to the headquarters in DC, it's an interesting experience. It's a free tour. You can see some of the artwork, some of the murals, the tapestries, the George Washington business, etc. But one thing I found interesting there was they try to claim that the society formed after the Treaty of Paris, and that's simply not true. And on top of that, if you go there, tell them JJ sent you and ask for the basement.
And I mean it, y'all have been one of the greatest groups I have ever worked with, really. Okay, are there any questions? Yes.
Where's the basement?
Excuse me?
Aren't we going to see the basement?
There's no basement at the Alamo.
Yeah, there is no basement at the Society of Cincinnati headquarters that I'm familiar with, but you can ask, because they do have secret passageways. It's a very interesting building. So it's there in DC near DuPont Circle, and that's actually how I discovered the Society of the Cincinnati, was running past their headquarters. I used to live in the neighborhood there in DC when I was stationed there with the Air Force, and I was on my normal route, run around the neighborhood, and I would run past the building, and I would say, "Oh, well, that's fancy. Society of the Cincinnati. I hail from Cincinnati. That's where I joined the Air Force out of. That's where I spent my teenage years." What we got here? Don't worry, our art channel. I'm glad to see you. We'll be talking about Bill Colby here shortly. I promise you. In fact, we could talk about Bill Colby right now if you want, because in my search for Bill Colby, when I was living there in DC, recently discovered in my, looking into Bill Colby, because Bill Colby appears to be a member of the Society of the Cincinnati. In fact, he has the same sort of heritage as Joseph Smith and Marvel Whiteside, Jack Parsons, of the Agape Lodge of the OTO. So both of those fellas forefathers Smith and Parsons were captains in the Massachusetts chapter, it appears, and therefore passing down the hereditary lineage to someone in that paternal line, right? You know, we can only make some guesses based upon looking at some family trees and stuff like that, but it does get kind of interesting because sometimes when there is no sons, it gets kind of funky when it gets passed down. So nonetheless, both Smith and Parsons, the captains from the society, that is, their grandfolks, Samuel Smith, the grandfather of that captain, was an accuser of multiple witches in the Salem witch trial. And the grandmother of that Captain Parsons from the society chapter of Massachusetts, forefather of Jack, well, she was an accused witch, Mary Bliss Parsons. Yeah, it's interesting. So we look at Bill Colby, his forefather, same difference. We'll be getting into that some tonight. And I don't know, he's also so disregard. So Captain Guy Colby of the Massachusetts chapter of the Society of the Cincinnati, his grandfather Colby, also an accuser in the Salem witch trials. I think this is all that these notes are important, as I've discussed these matters before relative to Parsons and Smith, and a little bit of my thoughts on the Salem witch trials is it's all about real estate. They're all robbing each other of real estate, power, greed, money, and most importantly, land. And that's an ongoing trend throughout all of these matters with the society that we'll be discussing tonight, real estate. And it's not just the Louisiana Purchase, which was brought to us by members of the Society of the Cincinnati. And quite honestly, they're just reclaiming land their forefathers got. In a land claim from 1362 called the Kensington Runestone. So this Kensington Runestone was a Knights Templar land claim for America, or at least a portion of it. And it just so happens, you might be thinking, well, if it's buried in Minnesota, how does that get us the Louisiana Purchase? Well, when this was buried, the common practice was to bury a land claim, triple dated, like this one is, and then you put it at the headways of a water system, and you then claim the property of all of that land that touches those waterways. And as a result of that, we happen to get that land here in America via a secret agreement between Spain and Napoleon. Napoleon was an original member of the Society of the Cincinnati, and other folks, like a member of British Parliament, who was an original member of the Society of the Cincinnati out of the New York chapter, a brother-in-law to Alexander Hamilton, who was the Vice President General of the Society of the Cincinnati, then the President General, until he was murdered in 1804 by Aaron Burr, another society member out of the New York chapter. These are the only times, ever since the onset of America, there's been these instances of conflict amongst this group and their external forces. But it was, before I get too far there, but it's strange that Colby has those same similarities, though. But we see a lot of these things, you know, amongst the notable names, especially in conspiracy culture and parapolitics, it seems. And when I was looking through Bill Colby's heritage and discovered he's likely a member, right? Then I found his eldest son, and then his eldest son's son, right? His eldest son's, you know, eldest son. Right. So that's the paternal heritage, right? This is the these men are the essentially the way I call this the Society of the Cincinnati Redux, because you know that sounds like a French word, right? But it's not. But it's just bringing back these things up, metaphorically speaking, because the society keeps coming back up, right? And not only that, we see them very, very much controlling a lot of aspects and feuds amongst them, right? Feuds amongst them, power, greed, and typically land. But so in discovering Bill Colby had those same kind of, you know, patterns, right? The society heritage with the Colby, the Salem witch trials. I find that very interesting. But this fella is the eldest son of Bill Colby's eldest son. So Eldridge Colby. He's a very prominent member amongst currently the Trump administration, but he seems to be well integrated within the Obama Clinton machine with Victoria Nuland and the New American Security, Center for New American Security, right? Which Victoria Nuland ran. She's the one who's been running point on all that Ukraine stuff. nonetheless, Eldridge Colby here, probably a member when his father passes away. His father's 84, I believe. And I discovered Eldridge Colby used to live across the street from me in that apartment in DC back when I used to run around the neighborhood, and I discovered the Society of the Cincinnati. So that's weird. That's weird. But these are high weirdness, as I like to say. But tonight's conversation here's on some of these matters of high weirdness and the Society of the Cincinnati and the implications of their actions and activities. So the best way to look at it, like I said, is they are the descendants of the Knights Templar, right? And much like the Knights Templar, passing down, membership to the through the paternal line, the paternal bloodline, right? So George Washington's the best example, and I'll put these links here in the show notes here, folks, tonight. This is the free Patreon preview of tonight's discussion, and we'll be going deeper into these matters on the Patreon side of tonight's show. Please join us over there, folks of the interwebs. You'll see a link in the show notes to do that. And I appreciate you folks of the interwebs already joining me at the Operation GCD Patreon. That is a good question. Our channel, I appreciate your dedication with Colby. It does motivate me. That isn't actually, you might have actually asked finally a good question there. Was Bill Colby murdered, and who did it and why? I presume he probably was murdered. It seems to indicate that. And it's a good question as to why. And it is these matters that we're discussing, the parapolitics with this group, right? So let's say Bill Colby was a Society of Cincinnati member. Well, that seems to have greater implications around his death, as does JFK Jr.'s mysterious, seemingly murder, right, with his plane situation on July 16th, 1999. So that's a very occult day, as I've covered here, especially within this group, it seems. The society, that is, covered that back on July 16th a few weeks ago there, when we celebrated Corey Feldman's birthday. If y'all aren't familiar with Corey Feldman, turned, I believe, 54 on July 16th, and I like to celebrate his entire life and works. Anyhow, on a more serious note, folks, I appreciate you standing by with my my humor there. So we see the Knights Templar, though, the descendants of being the Society of the Cincinnati, George Washington perhaps being the most Templar heritage, it seems, and perhaps that's why he was in charge. I'm not sure. But we see for example, George's forefathers, his 14th through 17th great-grandfathers, as exhibited there on that website, Famous Ken, and I'll put the link in the show notes for. You can look up a lot of folks in their Magna Carta connections. Nonetheless, the U.S. Constitution is referred to as the Magna Carta 2.0. So we have 561 years, approximately, circa, 1215 to 1776. And we have the descendant of those Templar that brought us Magna Carta, 10 of the 25 Knights Templar, their 14th through 17th great-grandson of 10 of those men, George Washington, is bringing us Magna Carta 2.0. That seems to indicate a deeper story and feuding, what I would call feuding bloodlines, because that's what the Magna Carta was, feuding bloodlines. Many of those knights were cousins with King John of Lackland, who had given away their land to the Vatican while they were away on the Crusades. And they just wanted their liberty and land back, and that's really what America's about. Getting liberty and land back, and that's what it's always been about. I like to say we live in a crown history, not crayon, but crown, like Vatican crown and English crown, but the Vatican really runs the English crown, right? So, for example, the city of London, the Vatican's city that predates the current London metropolitan city, and that individual in there, the report to the Vatican, do all the banking stuff, right? They can go into, there's individuals there that can go right into Parliament whenever they want. So, it seems like if you can just walk into Parliament anytime you want to, uninvited, and you can just join in the activities, well, then you're probably in charge. So, and we see this repeating pattern of behavior with the Vatican's influence, anti-liberty influences against America in an aspect, just like King John, to take away liberty and land, right? So as we see the 1362 Knights Templar land claim, them being the ancestor or descendants here in the Society of Cincinnati. But again, there's other, not all descendants of the Knights Templar are part of the Society of Cincinnati. And we see that exhibited by the Louisiana Purchase with elements of the Spanish, right? So there was elements of the Spanish that were descendants of the Templar as well. For example, Christopher Columbus's father-in-law was the head of the Templars in Spain or Portugal. I think it was Spain, the Knights of Christ, right? So, we see these continuing kind of patterns of behavior, even from those folks who are not members of the society, but are descendants of the Templar. Another good example would be the Charbonneau family of Quebec, the New France Quebec, before the British took over, but they somehow survived. And these were the folks who were the explorers and fur traders who would lead Lewis and Clark, along with founding Father Albert Gallatin. A lot of names we probably haven't heard, generally speaking, but these are the folks that helped, essentially reclaim America in a sense, because in a real way, that is what the again, the Magna Carta 2.0 was about. And we see again the same families, and we see family feuds, and we see it, these same family feuds portrayed here in America, and the same disputes from day one. So I've been covering. I got a new episode here, new volume in my Chasing Meniere series, along with my associate and dude Brad Bernard. He discovered the Society of Cincinnati by looking into his forefather, his heritage, and found his forefather working in a spy network for George Washington. Now, this is not the infamous Culpeper spy network of George Washington's, but they do intersect through William Duer, the man who was in charge of all of George Washington's spy networks. Brad's forefather, and along with the man who gave the Masonic rites at George Washington's funeral, a member of the Massachusetts chapter of the society, a Captain William Ricard, major figure in that tale. But that whole tale is about land, and those spies were falling around the Aaron Burr conspiracy in the years preceding and after the murder of Alexander Hamilton. So, and modern day historians recognize the Burr conspiracy as a coup of America, but they don't recognize the first step in that was the murder of Alexander Hamilton. So the president general of the society. And this is 5 years after, almost 5 years after, 4.5 after George Washington was poisoned on July 4th, 1799, when he resigned his post as president general, and Alexander Hamilton, the vice president general of the society, became president general. So, and George was poisoned on his ride back to Mount Vernon from Philadelphia that day. He was deathly ill. Did not have a last will and testament. 67-year-old man, totally healthy, and called his attorney as soon as he got back to Mount Vernon to do that last will and testament after 4 days of nearly dying, as he writes in his journals, on that carriage ride back to Mount Vernon from Philadelphia. So these disputes continue. And again, real estate seems to be a major factor in power, greed, and money, right? Often exhibited and manifested through real estate business. So George Washington had a lot of real estate in this country. Number one landowner, private landowner in America. He lost a lot of that land in the 1760s. A lot of land deeds went the way of Houdini, poof. He lost even more in the 1790s while he was president. So that doesn't indicate this fairy tale, this kind of Disneyland fairy tales we've been sold, but it is the ongoing things here that seem to be the underlying thread of, hood rat shit, always after land and doing land deals, right? It is a valuable resource. Always has been here in America. Again, that Kensington Runestone land claim. And in that regard, I made tonight's cover art kind of focused around that concept of America. These ideas of America and the folks associated with it are far more, it's a far older tale, right? It's a far older tale. And made the Muppet founding fathers and, the Declaration of Independence, but I put the Society of Cincinnati logo, the eagle, coming out of, an explosion, kind of rebirth like the Phoenix, because this was their rebirth of their nation, of their families have owned for a long time. And they keep getting it stolen from, like King John stole the land from their forefathers in the Magna Carta situation. So, and we see that even indicated in the way they started America. So the city of Cincinnati was their first action there, right? After the 1783, the first free city in America was Washington, Pennsylvania, started by Joseph Vance. This would be Joseph Vance's nephew. So after they start the city of Cincinnati down the Ohio River from Washington, PA, there, in the where it meets the Allegheny and the Monongahela, there, just south of Pittsburgh, we see Joseph Vance's nephew. This would be a first cousin to Abner Vance, if you know, at least on paper. He starts Lawrenceburg, Indiana, right across from Harrison, Ohio. You know, like the Harrison family and two presidents, right? More society folks, but. The next town over from Lawrenceburg, named after Lawrence Washington, of course, there, I believe. The next town over is Rising Sun, like the Rising Phoenix, right? Because this is their entry from Cincinnati to the Northwest expansion. And I don't know if they knew all the details. They had a lot of maps. That Charbonneau family from France. They had the maps from Albert Gallatin, the founding father, who was the Secretary of the Treasury in that Louisiana Purchase, right? So how much he knew about that land claim, I don't know, but we see all these factors involved with these real estate things, and that's January of 1803, they make that land purchase, and 16 months later, disregard 18 months later, Alexander Hamilton's murdered, and there's a faction of the society that's trying to take over America now, right? That's the Burr, General Wilkinson, and they're financed by European interests and the Vatican. And it's a Vatican trend, because I don't know, folks. The Kensington Runestone's a big. I knew you would say that, RR. I can count on you for something. So the Kensington Runestone, if you want to believe it's a hoax, you're certainly welcome to. I would argue you haven't looked at any of the details. You may have watched or read an article saying it was a hoax. But so the first that was found in 1898. The first geologist of Minnesota, state geologists. He conducted a series of studies on the weathering patterns of the rock and the roots that had entrenched its way onto the rock and left grooves. And looking at the various various minerals and whatnot, and they're left over and how they've degraded, comparing it across other degraded minerals from stones that are left outside in the weather and not buried underneath the tree roots at that point, right? On a mound, by the way. Nonetheless, that guy, what was his name? Newton Winchell. Concluded it was not a hoax. And then many years later, a different geologist, through a separate set of studies, similar, trying to date the weather patterns of that stone and whatnot and the grooves, determined the same thing. So the claims that it's a hoax, I think it indicates precisely what I'm discussing here tonight, folks, of the interwebs. We live in a crown history. It has been twisted, distorted, and lied to. Please give a source for allegation. It's not an allegation. I thank you for keeping me honest, but he was a major in the French Revolution, sanctioned by King Louis and Marie Antoinette. The society was. Marquis de Lafayette was the head, but Napoleon was a major. Other folks, basically most folks that are common names of French varieties here in America, are descendants of the French chapter. Now, one easy example is E.I. Dupont. E.I. Dupont was a lieutenant. He actually tried to help save Marie Antoinette and King Louis when shit went down. So again, there's various stages and actions of these revolutions, and it isn't just America and France, and it doesn't just involve members of parliament who are also members of the society. There's a revolution in Sweden, actually two, that involve Society, the Cincinnati members. And in fact, the current king of Sweden, or recent king of Sweden, was allegedly an honorary member of the Society, the Cincinnati. So again, there's greater implications. We have Russian royalty, disregard Prussian royal families, Swedish royal families, Polish, Czech royal families. These folks were coming over here and fighting wars over there at the same time. In fact, we have a British fellow who's a member of the society, Benjamin Latrobe. You may know him because he helped design a lot of buildings and architecture, right? So he was a British fellow, went to go fight in those Prussian wars, met General von Steuben, came to America with von Steuben. General von Steuben is one of the, essentially kind of one of the co-founders of the Society of Cincinnati. So we have a lot of European interests and actions and stuff going on that involves both sides, right? And General von Steuben and Henry Knox or the two men that solicited Washington to found the Society of Cincinnati. And again, they found it just south of Newburgh in General von Steuben's house on the banks of the Hudson in a mound site, May 13th, 1783. Friday the 13th, a very, would you say, Templar thing to do, since the Templar were famously put down on Friday the 13th. So I think there's a lot there that is probably passed down through these bloodlines as far as understandings go. But my point there is that when we see the ongoing warfare here in America, if you folks have ever heard me reference the American Revolution as the Wars of 1776, well, that's because it didn't end in 1783. In fact, there's ongoing warfare clearly through the War of 1812, which they burnt down Washington, D.C., courtesy coming up there through Quebec, right? Well, they burnt the White House, and one could say we lost that war, Nonetheless, at the same time, there's a Swedish situation popping off involving one of the Swedish fellows from the Society of Cincinnati and another revolution over there. And you may think, well, Swedish and all this stuff, it doesn't really seem to really affect much, especially today. Well, would argue differently. These Swedish fellows and that king of Sweden, Gustav, members of the society, these folks are cousins and uncles to the British royals. The Windsors, they're actually German. Yeah. So these are the same families, right? So, and they're descended more closely from King John. So we see literally the same descendants from that Magna Carta situation fighting it out still. And then we have the internal conflicts, the Burr conspiracy. Then we have internal family conflicts. Benjamin Franklin, not technically an honorary member by all records, but supported the Society of Cincinnati, a founding father, and his son was helping aid and abet that Burr conspiracy. He was a British loyalist and the last British governor of New Jersey. So we see the internal family feuds popping off. And that goes on again to the Civil War, because the Civil War, the Society of Cincinnati fractures in 1860. The Civil War starts in the spring of 61 and starts in South Carolina, and they're the ones who led the fracture, the South Carolina chapter. So in Abraham Lincoln, you can look at his whole murder in a couple different situations. First and foremost, his grandfather was a captain in the Virginia chapter of the Society of Cincinnati, Captain Abraham Lincoln. Now, Abe's dad was not the eldest son. So one could argue the eldest son was the hereditary member, and his son, right, would then become the member. His son's named Abraham Lincoln Mudd, the grandson of the other Abraham Lincoln, first cousins with President Abraham Lincoln. You may be thinking, Mudd, well, that sounds familiar. Yeah, Dr. Samuel Mudd was involved and charged in the conspiracy to murder Abraham Lincoln, imprisoned for it, in fact. That's where we get the term, his name was Mudd. Well, you can look at the Abraham Lincoln family tree and see that Abe's dad intermarries with the president Abe, that is. Too many Abes. They need new names. Abe's dad intermarries with the Isham Randolphs of Virginia. That's the Thomas Jeffersons and those folks. That's the Isham Randolphs. Blue blood family of Virginia, one of the founding families. But then you see his Abe's dad's older brother, right? The guy who had likely inherited that membership and then on to his son. His grandson would have been Abraham Lincoln Mudd. But nonetheless, you see that membership, and that dude, or the dude who likely got the membership, he intermarries with the Mudd family of Maryland. And then his daughter, whose mother's a Mudd, she's a Lincoln, she marries a Mudd. So there's a lot of Mudd stuff going on there, heavy Mudd stuff. But nonetheless, kind of paints a different light there on that aspect. And then in regards to Robert E. Lee, the general in charge of the society, or disregard the Confederate Army, he's essentially the step grandson-in-law. Step adopted grandson-in-law of George Washington. So Martha had kids with her first husband. George and Martha allegedly had no children, right? So she has children with her first husband. One of those children, her first husband dies, a young man, and his son, Daniel Parke Custis, dies at Yorktown, fighting next to George. He was an officer. in the Virginia chapter. That man's son was George Washington Parke Custis. Disregard, his father was Daniel Parke Custis, who died in battle, Yorktown. George Washington Parke Custis was then there raised as the son of George and Martha Washington. You know, his father had passed; he was a young child. That man's son, George Washington Parke Custis, his daughter marries Robert E. Lee. The land that he got through the heritage of Martha's first husband, and again all that land that they owned. Some of that land was passed down to George Washington Parke Custis and then to his daughter and Robert E. Lee. That land is known as Arlington National Cemetery today because they lost that real estate in part of the truce there of the Civil War. So these matters not only seem to be family feuds, but it also seems to revolve around real estate. And that seems to be a going trend here. But these are the matters we're getting into tonight here, folks, of the interwebs. I do thank you again for joining me here tonight to get a little GCD. And it's not just the foundation of America and the Civil War situations, right? Because again, the officers of the Civil War are the descendants and likely hereditary members of the original officers of the wars of 1776, the founding members of the society, and thus the founding members of this country. Like I said, Henry Knox was again one of the men that solicited Washington to start the society. He had a son. His son didn't live very long, didn't have any children either. He had one son into adulthood. His daughter, however, had a son, and he seems to have been the one who got the membership from Henry, because that man was an admiral for the Union Army in the Civil War. And this is a going trend again across the board. Robert E. Lee, he's got heritage in the Lee family there. So, and again, a lot of these families, they intermingle, they marry together, and we see that time and time again. And we see that with folks like Jefferson Davis. Jefferson Davis, he marries Zachary Taylor's daughter. Zachary Taylor, president, honorary member of the society, but that's what again, they claim that he was just an honorary member, not a hereditary member, because he was a president, so he gets to become honorary member, right? But the hereditary members get to pass down their membership, and the honorary members do not. Now, Zachary Taylor's father was a major in the Virginia chapter of the Society of Cincinnati. So where that membership goes, I don't know, because it seems like it would have gone to Zachary. And then I don't know if so I don't know if it went down, if Jefferson Davis and his daughter, who's named after Henry Knox, by the way, Zachary Taylor's daughter, that is the wife of Jefferson Davis, right? The president of the Confederacy, right? U.S. Senator from Mississippi before that, who worked with a hereditary member of the society out of Rhode Island to study the mounds and create the Smithsonian. The first action of the Smithsonian was to study the mounds in, was that 1848, the Squire and Davis survey. So that was why it started. And again, these are a group of folks that, and they're really big into the mounds, right? They're the ones that map them and survey them, that we even know that many of them existed, because a lot of them have been destroyed. But Jefferson Davis, his father was a major in the Virginia chapter. So we see the Taylors and the Davises, again, by claims, Jefferson Davis wasn't a hereditary member, but it seems like he probably was. And in the War of 1812, he was a captain. So again, the officers of the original members continue to be the officers in later situations, later conflicts, were the same conflict, as I would argue. The wars of 1776 continued on through 1812, in my opinion. Clearly, but that's what the record states. The facts would indicate. But we see Jefferson Davis out in Iowa, or later, I don't think it was Iowa yet, but guarding what is now known today as the Effigy Mound National Park. So, a lot of mound stuff. And he has the second biggest giant dick statue behind Washington, Jefferson Davis, that is. So, we see these ongoing conflicts, folks, and I do often describe it as a liberty and anti-liberty movement, because what we do also see is the continued European interest in the Vatican, from the Blennerhassett support and other European support of Aaron Burr and General Wilkinson and their coup, right? There's direct lineage from that coup to the power structure of the Confederacy. And on top of that, in the Confederacy, we see the Vatican, who basically doesn't get any credit for being involved in the Abraham Lincoln murder, despite folks of the interwebs, if you're not familiar, the United States of America nearly cut off all diplomatic relations permanently with the Vatican in the aftermath of the about 2 years later, because the Vatican was hiding one of the indicted conspirators in the murder of Abraham Lincoln, John Surratt. So, and it came down to the America saying, well, we're not going to be, we cut off diplomatic relations with you. And then like 3 months later, they shit out John Surratt. So the Vatican is most certainly involved in that, and complicit in the cover-up. Now, are they complicit in the financing and murder? Well, it seems to be, because that goes back to Quebec again. And, they were financing the Confederacy out of Quebec. There's indications that even Lincoln himself went up there for a secret meeting to try to settle the war over these matters in Quebec. So, yes, thank you. I appreciate your dedication is it's unrivaled. It keeps me motivated. So you're saying the Vatican's not involved or complicit? Because again, the evidence would indicate you're wrong. Not a new thing for you, but something you should get used to. So John Surratt, again, then you got Mudd, who's a deeply ingrained within the Lincoln family, right? Lincoln's cousin's a Mudd, right? Double Mudd. So it paints a different picture, I think. And a lot of these things, again, around these heritage and ancestries revolves around the modern incarnation of the Templar, or the Society of Cincinnati. And again, it's not just America, but obviously a large part. But appreciate you folks joining me here tonight. One last note here. Again, the French names, probably all Cincinnati folks, right? The Bouviers, for example, Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, Bouvier Kennedy Onassis, the DuPonts. Now, I'm not saying Shia LaBeouf's a member, but the LaBeoufs have membership in the French chapter. Lieutenant or Colonel, in fact, actually. Same with the Bouviers. That's a general. Then you have when we look at all these things, I think the last thing I can leave with you all here tonight before we go over to Patreon is these organizations get compromised over time, and there's an ongoing feud amongst these folks to constantly, it seems, to do that. So it is odd today where we have an American Pope, right, charged of that Vatican, who's a prevost. Now, it seems that he's got family within the French chapter from an admiral prevost. And that's not the only one, it seems. He's also got some lineage. He shares some lineage with Rodney Alcala, the serial killer from the Dating Game and other murders. And they're both out of New Orleans in these French Protestant families. And it's interesting. So again, I'm not saying the Pope's a member. I'm just saying he's got kinfolk in his prevost family that are members. And then he's got I can't think of the other name. Boo something. Let me see here. Boo. Yeah, I don't recall. I went over it the other day though in my occult genealogy of America last week, folks, on the interweb. So check that one out. So I'm horrible with names, especially the French ones. They all sound like Fraggle Rock. So Rodney Alcala. Yeah, he's got some. Again, I'm not saying he was a member, but his father's maternal grandfather, right? So his great grandfather, right? Rodney's was not only the mayor of, his great grandfather was not only the mayor of San Antonio, an early mayor, was one of the first Texas Rangers. That man's father was. So, and then that was back to the 1830s, and that man came from New Orleans because these are New Orleans French families. Like I was saying, upon the dissolution of a lot of matters and the chopping off of heads, a lot of heads got lopped off, folks, of Marie Antoinette and King Louis, the folks that sanctioned the French chapter and were involved in matters such as those Swedish revolutions, right, with the Gustavs, the folks that are directly related to the British royal family, the current folks. So closely related. So the French, after that happened, again, E.I. DuPont almost got his head lopped off where he made it over here to America because he tried to help the French king and queen there escape. And they all the rest of the French chapters French members fled to New Orleans. That became their epicenter of activity and basis of operations. So, and we see that again. So the Bonapartes, Napoleon was an original member. An argument can be made that he's the one that came to America, not his younger brother. But as on paper it says, his grandnephew, right? The grandson of his brother, right? started the FBI, was a major figure in the U.S. State Department, Department of Defense, etc. Charles Bonaparte. So, thank you, sir. Appreciate it, Jonah. So, and again, the French names, are probably part of the Cincinnati, right? Or at least their families are. At least their families. That's what I'm saying. So, I don't have Bill Colby's membership card, but again, we look at his grandson. What's his grandson doing? Major player in politics, in government, right? We look at Henry Knox's grandson, Admiral, Union Army, Civil War. We look at, I can keep going. I mean, we go David Vance, Captain David Vance of the North Carolina chapter. This would be Abner Vance's uncle. No direct relation to me, but again, Abner's probably not a Vance by all indicators, and evidence exhibits that. Nonetheless, Captain David Vance's grandson, General Zebulon Vance, Confederate Army, 2-time governor of North Carolina. And speaking of 2 times, have y'all met Ted?
There's thousands of Americans out there. By the way, I've been shot with a laser beam twice.
Watch out, folks. They got Ted twice. So on that note, folks of the interwebs, thank you all for joining me here from free Patreon side. Come on over to patreon.com/OperationGCD. Links in the show notes. And if you catch this broadcast in the future, find us over there. And RR, I appreciate your dedication. I'm sure I'll see you next time. I'll bring some more fun-filled Bill Colby notes for you, especially when we start doing those Salem witch trials. Because why do all these people go through the society? Well, at least the northern folks do, right? The Massachusetts seems to go through the society, and those families all seem to be involved in the Salem witch stuff. Again, Salem witch stuff. So again, it seems like real estate matters, but I salute your dedication there, RR. I think it's great you show up here in the chat. I always find it nice to have folks around me that are always wrong. That way I know where I stand in this world. So anyhow, on that note, yes, thank you. Appreciate it, sir. On that note, I will catch you folks. Yes, sir. Jim Bobby. I almost want to call you Jimmy Bobby, but Jim Bobby. Yes, sir. Thank you. And we'll catch y'all. Not all nights are bad. No, thank you. I'm glad I caught that, Ivana. Yes. My argument on that topic, just generally speaking, if you want to badmouth the Knights Templar, you're certainly welcome to. However, the ability to do so is contingent upon the actions of the Knights Templar and freedom of speech, liberty, and land. And on that note, I will catch you folks later. Yes. Twizzle stick. Yes, sir. Thank you. You don't want to see that Appalachian grin. You see an Appalachian grin, you're probably in the wrong spot. But anyhow, I will catch you folks over next time. Got Operation GCD live Wednesdays, an occult and esoteric review of the 1993 cinematic masterpiece, Sneakers, where one of the core questions I ask in that review and the discussion we'll be having revolves around the fact that this is a film that comes out right around the time the Promise software scandal is becoming public, and it hasn't really become public yet. The Danny Casolaro octopus stuff. And in fact, when you look at that, how do these folks know about that scandal and have embedded a lot of those details in this film in 1993? And it's a very conspiratorial minded film with folks like Dan Aykroyd. Most of his lines are very conspiracy theory related, from moon stuff to the CIA to assassinations. So even the commentary in the film is of great fodder for review. But anyhow, and then Thursdays, be back here again for Operation GCD Thursdays, the anatomy of a satanic panic, along with everyone's favorite Lieutenant Colonel Satanist psychological operations fella, Mike Lucchino, right? And we'll be diving back into the early onset, the first time we hear the term satanic panic, which is 1975, when it starts revolving around the evangelical movement with folks like Jack Chick, John Todd, and in fact, the Process Church of the Final Judgment, who just went evangelical at the same time via the Foundation Faith of God. So we're going to be unpacking some of the psychological operations around those events, the early onset of the term satanic panic, and the parties that suddenly all went evangelical at the same time. These Satanist parties, that is. And Fridays, Fridays this week, going to be having Phil Z back on, Phil Cesaro. He's recently done some professional book reviews on the 2 Idaho 4 books The Garbage by Howard Bloom, and The Garbage by Epstein's buddies, Vicky Ward and James Patterson. That's right. Yeah, Vicky Ward's already run cover for Epstein before, and James Patterson lived next door. And big friends with Bill Clinton, just saying. Anyhow, we'll be doing a review on those this week, and I believe Kane and Jen from Criminal Confidential will be joining me on that discussion as well. So look forward to y'all joining us for those shows, and thanks again for joining me here tonight. Get a little GCD.
Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Out in the holler where the secrets creep, garbage can dudes digging mighty deep. Secret societies, shadows in the pines. Operation GCD of American rebels design. Double J searching deep in his brain hole, past layers of melted hops and bone resin. From cults to cover-ups, we're talking about all of that. So watch your sixth friend and the truth we trust. The world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Join us on the journey and enjoy the show. Thanks for joining us to get a little GCD. The world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beam. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Hell, the world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Out in the holler where the secrets creep, garbage can dudes digging mighty deep. Secret societies, shadows in the pines. Operation GCD of American rebels design. Double J searching deep in his brain hole, past layers of melted hops and bone resin. From cults to cover-ups, we're talking about all of that. So watch your sixth friend and the truth we trust. The world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Join us on the journey and enjoy the show. Thanks for joining us to get a little GCD. The world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beam. grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze.